Donna Akwaba. Akwaba simply means welcome. And the response to that is Mendazi. Good morning. And for those of you whom I have not seen since the beginning of the new year, Happy New Year. My name is Dr. Clyde Robinson. I'm the Director for the Center for African and African American Studies and an Associate Professor of Humanities here at Southern University at New Orleans. We fondly refer to this beautiful university as SUNO. So again, welcome. Why are we gathered here today? We're gathered here today to commemorate a man who toiled for many years. He was not a product of SUNO, nor was he here a very long time. However, during his stay here, he made an indelible impact not only on the university, but also on the city of New Orleans. I'm talking about Dr. Charles Frye, who is my predecessor and the third director for the Center for African and African American Studies. We are here today to discuss a very important topic. This is a topic that we all should take ownership in. I know that seated at the tables all around me are people who have devoted their lives to pursue this topic, and it is justice. So if there's justice, because this is an organic world, there will be injustice, and because there's injustice, there are people who fight to attain justice. And our speaker today is more than expert, more than ready and willing to discuss that topic. She will be introduced to you very soon. I have some very special welcomes here today. I don't know if you've read the latest copy of the Louisiana Weekly. Has anyone? The first page of the Louisiana Weekly, there is an article, and it says that the UNCF, the United Negro College Fund, has urged HBCUs to reach out and bring into their bosom K-12 students. Well, we at SUNO are doing that. In the Center for African and African American Studies, we're doing that. We have in this house today schools with which we're working very closely. We are developing with them programs to bring to their dynamic institutions. We invite them to our programs, and we are also building literary centers at these schools. St. Catherine's, formerly known as Xavier Prep. McDonough, number 35. St. Mary's Academy. These are schools with which CAAS is developing a very special relationship. I'd also like to acknowledge my SUNO family. All SUNO family members, please stand. From administrators to students to retirees, I welcome you. Welcome back home. And to our guests, special guests, to Professor Angela Hill's family and friends and comrades, please stand. We also have in that mix, we have the living legend from the Center for African and African American Studies from the year 2019, Brother Malik Rahim. And of course, we have Ms. Darlene Holmes and Sister Linda, who are members of my staff. Again, welcome to the 2020 Charles Frye Memorial Lecture. At this time, I'd like to bring to the podium Dr. John Penny, Chair of the Criminal Justice Department.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. It is my expressed gratitude that I was invited here today, and I'm sure that you will find a kind of platform for healing beyond what you would expect. And so now, if you would just bow your heads, we will lead you into an invocation. God of our weary years, and God of our silent tears, God has brought us thus far along the way. We ask now that you would just continue to lift us up and give us the strength to see beyond our current situation and see how we can break the chains of all kinds of isms that have held us back. Keep us in the path of righteousness for your sake. This is the day that you have made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it, because it is a day that you've made, and then we will give you the honor, the praise, and the glory that you deserve. But God, until that time, we ask that you would just continue to let us see the injustices that have plagued us for such a long, long time, and that we will rise up and take control of our destiny in the sense that we can praise you and be free to worship you in the way that you would want us to. Guide us in our purpose, and SUNO, our leadership, we ask that you would continue to be with us, break the chains that have been haunting the institution over the years, that we might be free to educate and eradicate the things that have been so detrimental to us, and race that is set before us and deal it out. Education, let that be the job that we can do without the shackles that we've had in the past. Grant us all that we need in order to be free, to be who you have designed us to be. And God, we will then give you the glory, the honor, and praise that you deserve, all to the good name of our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ, we pray. Amen.
Ashe. Thank you, Brother Penny. Of course, we can't begin a program like this without a rendering of our national anthem, the Black National Anthem. And to do that, we have the St. Catherine Choir under the management of Ms. Colette Handy, Choir Master.
Okay, Mark.
Good morning, everyone. We ask everyone to stand, please. We will be singing, you will be singing with us the first verse, and then we're going to sing the other two. If you want to continue to sing with us, we have no problem. You just have to follow my direction. Okay? So thank you very much for inviting me and my choir today. We are very excited to be here. This is a very momentous occasion, and it's one that I hope everyone takes some lesson with when they leave. Thank you very much.
Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky. We are marching the rolling trot, better the chastening ride, chanting the day that Lord unborn had died. Yet with the steady beat, have not our weary heart, chose to a place on which our fathers died. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come shedding our pay to the blood of the slaughter. Out from the gloomy past, still now we stand at last, where the heartbeat of our song is cast. We God of our wearies, God of our silent tears, Thou who has brought us thus far on Thy way. Thou who has by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places of God where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hands, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Again, the St. Catherine's Choir, under the directorship of Sister Andy. I'd also like to say one other thing about St. Catherine's. It is the alma mater of our speaker, who was a part of the music program as drum major back, 3 years ago?
Yeah, something like that.
Again, St. Catherine's, thank you very much. I'd like to bring to the podium now a person to whom I report, one of SUNO's dynamic leaders, Dr. Brenda Jackson, who is Vice Chancellor, Research and Strategic Initiatives and Executive Director of the Title III program. Dr. Jackson, to bring welcome from the administration here at the university.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Happy Monday. Happy Black History Month. On behalf of the administration of Southern University at New Orleans, SUNO, we welcome you very much so to the first lecturer of 2020, African American History Month. We are so very happy that you're here. We're looking at Catherine Drexel, 35, Xavier Prep, and all of you. You make these things possible for us, and we appreciate you so very much. Do come back and do enjoy. I believe that you are in for a real treat. Good morning.
you, Dr. Jackson. I'd also like to, since we're in the mode of recognizing people, recognize our speaker's very close family. Can you please stand? The relatives, the husband, the mother and husband of our speaker, Angela Hill. Can you please stand? Angela. Thank you and welcome. If you've noticed, I've said it once, and you see it on your documents, this is the Charles Frye Memorial Lecture Program. Who was Charles Frye? To answer that question, I would like to bring to the podium a young lady, when I arrived 3 years ago, was my student as an undergrad. Now she will be graduating in only 1 year and a half.
Oh, no, I'm graduating late.
I know. Okay, so it's only 1 year. Well, 1 year in graduate school. That is phenomenal. She's graduating in May with a master's degree in museum studies. This young lady has researched Charles Frye and will bring us reasons why we have identified this, the first lecture of African American History Month, to Dr. Charles Frye. Miss Elena Carter.
Hello, everyone. Before I begin, students, I'm going to ask a favor of you. For the beginning of my speech, because I know cell phones are our friends, I'm going to ask you not to touch them. However, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to need some answers, but y'all are going to need to use y'all phones, okay? So, bear with me for maybe the first couple of minutes, and then we're going to get into that. But I want y'all to listen to what I'm saying, because it's going to come in later on. Got it? Okay. Since 1989, the Center for African and African American Studies has provided educational opportunities to not only the SUNO family, but to the city as well. The Center for African and African American Studies holds the largest collection of African artifacts in the state of Louisiana and continues to provide public programming for the community. It is an official affiliate of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, but the second, Dr. Charles Frye, created the mold of what is now the Center of African and African American Studies. Dr. Charles Frye's legacy began long before arriving at SUNO, but everything he did before getting here seems to prepare him for his impending role. After receiving his bachelor's and master's degrees from his hometown HBCU, Howard University, Dr. Frye attended the University of Pennsylvania, receiving his PhD in higher education with a concentration on development and curriculum. According to the New York Times, his dissertation, Toward a Philosophy of Black Studies, shaped African and African American studies programs throughout the world. He taught at over 6 different universities, including his alma mater, Howard, and here at SUNO. Dr. Frye was devoted to teaching people around the world about Black studies and the disciplines within, including history, culture, sociology, and religions of African and African American culture. The Independent, a British newspaper, stated Dr. Frye used themes of multiculturalism and Black studies in his writings to bring together the Black experience in America. He made reference to present-day Africa and its art, literature, and religious traditions. Dr. Frye wrote several books, including The Anatomy of Black Philosophy, Values in Conflict, Blacks and the American Ambivalence Towards Violence, The Peter Pan Chronicles, he was the founding editor of the New England Journal for Black Studies, editor of Contributions in Black Studies, and author of many articles and professional journals. Okay, do me a favor and look up the word vigilance. If you had a phone on you and you are in the grades 9 through 12, the word vigilance. Who has it? What is it? Talk loud.
Keeping careful watch for possible danger or difficulties.
Okay. Now, look up the word vigilante. What you got? Oh no, baby, you gotta talk a little bit louder.
I'm trying to talk my loudest. A member of a self-appointed group of citizens who undertake law enforcement in their community without legal authority, typically because of legal agencies are thought to be ineffective.
Okay, so basically, when you are vigilant, you are keeping watch. Vigilant is the word for today. Dr. Frye was vigilant. He kept watch. He kept documents. He made sure that schools like 35 and Prep, y'all existence mattered. St. Mary's, I'm sorry, my mom is a Maryite. I just, trust me, I'm there. I'm a Mustang, but toodaloo, just messing with you. Anyways, Dr. Frye did something during a time where people didn't want you to learn your history. Like, I'm talking to the students because right now we have a disconnect with understanding the importance of who we are as people. Because without understanding who you are as a black person, as an African person, let it be 1 drop, 2 drops, 20 drops, 40 drops, or 80 or 90, because none of us are pure. You need to know it. Because without African history, you don't know American history. Without African history, you don't know Greek history. Without African history, you don't know Middle Eastern history. It's at the root. But we don't learn it. I know for a fact you're not learning it. You get 1 month. 1 month. But this is thousands and thousands of years of history that has shaped us as a people. And we don't know it. So this man, honestly, in my definition, became a vigilante. Why? Because he bucked against the system. But he did it in a way that was strategic. Because one thing that we know about this country is systematic. You can't just go and say, I'm going to teach something. You have to study it. You have to become an expert at it. And you have to develop it. And that's what he did. He developed a program to teach black people about who they are. And he did it so well that they have used it across the country. He did it because during a period of time, even in HBCUs, at St. Mary's, at Prep, at 35, we weren't allowed to learn African history. The only history you learned was that the first place of civilization was Mesopotamia. That ain't true. But that's what you've learned. You've learned that there were people and sailors who came here in the 14 and 1300s. People were sailing around the continent and around the world way long before that. But guess where those people came from? Africa. The reason why your ancestors were chosen as slaves was not because they were lazy and stupid and couldn't follow directions. They were chosen because they were blacksmiths. They were chosen because they knew how to use wood. They were chosen because they knew how to cultivate rice. Without these things, you have no civilization. The reason why they were chosen is because they developed civilization. And in order to develop a new civilization, you needed the masters. You needed the master architects. But what we've been taught is that being a slave was, granted, it was horrible. I'm not saying, when I say this, go deeper than what I'm saying. It was a bad thing. You come from a line of geniuses. But we're not learning that. So the reason why you are here today is to understand the importance of learning that if you don't know where you come from, you face injustices. And now we have a Trump. I'm sorry if you are a supporter of him, but I will go into why factually that makes no sense. Real talk, like, but listen, a lot of young people are anti-Trump because that's what you hear. You're not anti-Trump because you don't understand what he is. And what he is a result of us not being active on the injustices that we've been facing. We've accepted education for our children as mediocre. We've stepped away from the role of the family. And if you claim to be an African-based person or from the diaspora, understanding that family is the root of it all. God is even at the heart because that's the center of you. And when you don't have family and you don't have God, you will not have a proper education. Because if your family doesn't care necessarily about, and it's not that they don't care, they don't know because we haven't been taught. And when you haven't been taught, you don't demand those things. Real talk, how many of y'all knew who Charles Frye was before you sat here today? It's not your fault. Because honestly, I had no clue to who he was until the first time I gave this speech. There are so many people. Have you heard of Ruby Bridges? Have you heard of Leona Tate? Shocking. And the reason why I say shocking is because sadly enough, we don't know them. But remember, this country is, what is the S word? Systematic. When you don't know who you are, you don't know where you come from, you end up on a phone trying to look like, be like, talk like, act like other people. You start looking to outside things to fill something that you're missing within because you don't know who you are. I'm a parent. I'm not speaking from somebody who doesn't understand children. I was a teenager. First generation of cell phones. We used to have pagers that we would have to go and call from payphones to call people back. Talking about 1998, 1999. Not that long ago. So I know what it's like to be young and not caring about the world, but y'all are inheriting a crumbling democracy. And part of that crumbling democracy is because the root of this country, the black people, not just black in terms of speaking English, I'm talking about the Hispanic black people, French black people,
Portuguese.
We're everywhere. But we don't talk to each other. We put each other down because we look different from each other. Because that's what we were taught to do, so we won't build each other up. So we have to be vigilante. We have to buck against the system, and we have to start demanding things that's going to better us and complete us as people. And that's ultimately all this man was trying to do. To create some type of foundation for you to learn who you are. Because there are people who have died on college campuses fighting for that. Southern University in Baton Rouge, do your research.
Yeah.
SUNO. I have a cousin who claimed that my grandmother found him on TV because he was out here protesting the fact that you could not learn your history in an HBCU.
That's right.
But y'all, history doesn't matter, but it does. Because if you don't know about Hitler, you don't know about Trump.
Come on with it, dog. The same thing.
So, when you're on your phones, and you're looking at your lashes, and you're trying to figure out your prom dress, research your history. Look up Abu Bakr II. See how a black man bankrupted the entire world. Really, he bankrupted it. Go learn about the one-eyed queen that defeated Roman Empire. Like, we don't just say you come from kings and queens to buck your heads up. We say it because it is the truth.
That's right.
So, thank y'all for listening. And remember Dr. Charles Frye. And remember that African philosophy is at the root of understanding who you are as people. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. I think we can go home now. All right. I just want to bring two things to your attention. One, the theme If you look at your program in what is the left upper corner, you'll see a word pronounced AKOBEN, AKOBEN. AKOBEN. AKOBEN is actually a war horn. It's an Adinkra symbol found in Ghana. That war horn is sounded whenever there's an alarm in the village. Well, we've adopted that for this year's theme in the Center for African and African American Studies, the AKOBEN, vigilance, calling the students of SUNO, calling the students of New Orleans and throughout the state of Louisiana to educational, civic, cultural, and social action. That's what led me to Angela. Sister Angela Bell, not Hill, Angela Bell. I met Sister Angela a year ago now, as we were planning the Living Legend affair for Brother Malik Rahim. And Sister Angela started talking, and I started talking about ways that we could continue the relationship. Well, this is the first phase. This setting is the first phase. If there's a first phase, then there's a second phase. And I want to bring this to your attention. There are flyers on the table, the sign-in table, for you to pick up and peruse and act upon. After we finish this today, it's not over. It's only the beginning, because we gather once again in Baton Rouge on Friday, a day of advocates, teaching advocacy, disrupting the injustice narrative, the inaugural Underground Railroad to Justice Summit, which will take place in Baton Rouge, in Baker, because it has outgrown the available space on Southern's campus. And I'm sure Professor Bell will discuss that during her presentation. But this is the first in a week-long activity, which focuses in on injustice. We are sounding the AKOBEN, the warning. Young people, I am so pleased that you were addressed quite personally. This is not a frivolous time. It wasn't when I was a child. It wasn't when my parents were children. It certainly isn't now. This is not an age of innocence. All sorts of injustices are enacted upon you daily. You may or may not realize it. But it's important for you to be in a setting like this, to meet people like these, so that as you move forward, you are informed and aware. And I'm sure on Friday there will be schools gathering to listen to the experts discuss topics of importance. At this point, I'd like to bring the SGA Vice President to the podium, Brother Jamal. Brother Jamal will introduce to us our speaker. Brother Jamal.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to Southern University at New Orleans on behalf of the student body and the SGA, where I serve as Vice President. Again, my name is Jamal. I'm a senior here studying I'm a senior studying public administration. I saw in the thing that I'm underneath criminal justice, but I'm public administration with a minor in computer information system. I want to thank Dr. Robinson for having me to welcome our distinguished guests. And like Ms. Carter said, I did not know who this sister was a couple of days ago, but I had to do a little research. When he told me she was an attorney, the first thing I thought of, and some of my millennials can relate, when I thought of an attorney, I thought of one call, that's all, Morris Boyd. And I thought of Big Frida saying Juan LaFontaine. And Chip Forstall takes care of it all. And that's what we think of when we think of attorneys. But the truth is, this sister really takes care of it all. So she's a true advocate for injustice. And it's important that we are exposed to that as youth, as young people. Dr. Penny and I, we have went to Angola 2 times since I've been here at SUNO, and we are able to drive the bus inside of Angola. Now, my uncle was recently just released a couple of months ago, spent, I think, his whole, adulthood in Angola. Many of y'all may know him, Fish, they call him Henry, big dark black guy. We used to always call him, you can't get no blacker than Henry. But I was able to not just visit him, I was able to go inside Angola and to see the solitary confinements that people like Mr. Woodfox were in. And to see that, sometimes you need to be exposed. And it's so important to get that exposure. With that exposure, it may change and churn something inside of you that you may say, you know what, let me change the trajectory of what I want to do and be in life. And I'm sure that happened as well with Sister Bell, being a student and then graduating and then sitting in the appellate course for 10 years. And as we just talked, she said that changed her focus. And many of us want to be models and rappers. I did myself, rap and model and stuff. But the truth is, when you get that exposure, and then you get that here at HBCU, you may find yourself saying, you know what, that education, that moment may change the trajectory of what I want to do and be in life. And even just looking her up, I went to see Just Mercy. I don't know how many people saw that just recently, and it brought tears to my eyes. And I went to Broad Street Theater, and what really caught me the most was the fact that there was a handful of black people in that theater, but the theater was packed with white folk. And they want to learn our history. They want to see the suffering, but you ask one of our sisters and brothers to go there, and I don't have time for that. And I think that's just sad. The sister, the Queen, she was telling me the other day, Jamal, she went out to see the Martin Luther King Museum, and they asked her, and I had something similar experience. They asked her to, if you have $100, give me 5 civil rights activists, and you got 1 minute to do it, besides Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks. And it was not only SUNO, it was Dillard and Xavier that was there. Nobody could answer that question. And I had that similar experience when I was a freshman here. It was 30 of us in class, and it was asking us, does anybody, my teacher, white man at that time too, Professor Stern, he asked us, how many of y'all know James Baldwin? And I looked around the class, and none of us raised our hands. Just like Miss Carter just asked, to raise your hand if you know these. And it's sad that you don't know. We as black folk don't know our leaders. There's a reason why you're sitting here and able to get an education. It's because of those who came before us. Those who suffered in solitary confinement for over 40 years, over decades, of not talking to someone. That's serious. So, this sister here, again, I can read and talk about all the different awards, but I think what really struck me the most is when she, when you think of these commercials, and again, they say before you accept a quick check with me. This sister is checking injustices. And so this sister here is one that we need to promote and respect and do our research like I did. To know how important this jewel is. And so again, I could go through all the lists, but I think that it's better that you connect with who this sister is. And I wanted you to just smile and laugh, but to know how serious it is that we have this sister here fighting for people who are voiceless. Again, I thank you and I welcome you to Southern University on behalf of the SGA and student body.
Good afternoon. It is a tremendous honor for me to be here with you today to speak on this occasion. And I want to be sure that I start by making you aware that this is so much more than just an invitation for me today. Because SUNO holds cherished memories. I completed my very first college course here at SUNO. My mother worked in the library here at SUNO for over 40 years. the SUNO community became my extended family. The library at SUNO was a personal laboratory of sorts. It is in that library that I developed my great love for books and my passion for research. But this occasion also means a lot to me because my life's work has simply taken me on too many close encounters with injustice. I would like to say to you a sincere thanks to Dr. Robertson, Darlene Holmes, Linda Hill, the Center for African and African American Studies, and the administration at SUNO for consistently offering insightful and relevant programming. And I would also like to thank my alma mater, St. Catherine Drexel, for the amazing choir selection this morning, but for the immeasurable role that my education there played in my life after high school. And also thank each of you for the sacrificial time that you have given today for this very historic convening. During an interview, a reporter asked a Louisiana lawyer to describe what it is like being a social justice advocate in the state of Louisiana. And I want to read to you a quote saying what that lawyer said in response to that question. The lawyer said, "Each day I feel less like a lawyer and more like a part of a modern underground railroad system. My work involves the daily disruption of a state-sanctioned human trafficking system and the battling of Jim Crow, who refuses to be evicted from the South." Now, I'm imagining when you hear things like Jim Crow and Underground Railroad, you are attributing those words to a lawyer from a time gone by. But in truth, I spoke those words just 2 years ago. In order to have an intellectually honest conversation about criminal justice reform, we have to confront mass incarceration. And we cannot discuss mass incarceration without talking about the 13th Amendment. And there is no way to have a meaningful conversation about the 13th Amendment without first discussing slavery. So that will be our starting point for today. You should know, during the slavery era, there were jails. They did exist. But those jails usually at that point housed white folks and immigrants. It was rare to see an African American person in jail. For African Americans during the slavery era, justice was meted out on plantations. We need to talk about what the political climate was on the eve of emancipation. And we should know, just like today, there were two big political parties. There were the Democrats and there were the Republicans, and I'm in the year about 1860 right now. And the question that they had to entertain in 1860 was, what would we do with all of those emancipated people if we decided to release them and free them? What are we going to do? So inside the Republican Party, there's factions at this point. They're the radical Republicans who says they're innocent. They have contributed mightily to American society, and the right thing to do would be to release them, grant them citizenship, make them equal. That is the radical Republicans. You have the moderates, and they feel quite different. The moderate Republicans said the damage is just too severe. There would be no way to have racial harmony if we released these people, and it was their vision that they would be colonized. Ship them out of here, send them to Africa or the West Indies, and if you have been taught this false history that Abraham Lincoln loved black folks,
That's right.
this would be the moment to tell you that he was amongst the moderate Republicans.
That's right.
So he did not envision you being here. His plan was that you would be colonized and shipped out of here.
That's right.
And the Democratic Party that many of us are so loyal to, they also endorse the idea of colonization. So if you listen carefully, you just heard that the majority wanted to colonize the enslaved people. And so you might be wondering, how did we get left here? How did that happen? There were some practical concerns that crept into this conversation. Here's the first, the cost. How much is it actually going to cost us to get each body, ship those people out? And they calculated that might be around $20 million. And they just weren't willing to spend the money. That was problem number one. Problem number two was the idea that if we move all of these enslaved people, we have now lost the labor class in the South. And in their minds, it was not comprehensible that they would be laborers, because in their minds we were biologically limited to being servants and laborers. So that entered the discussion. And then third was the conversation of cotton. If they leave, who is going to pick the cotton? Because the cotton is no longer just the industry that we depend on in the South. It is now a national and a global industry. And so for all of these collective reasons, we are not colonized. We remain in this country. Now, here's a couple of things to consider right before we get this thing called the 13th Amendment. We start now having cases that are teaching us some things in terms of how the law views African Americans. The law supported the institution of slavery. It safeguarded it and protected it. But then we get a case called Dobard versus Nunez, which expands now the way the law is viewing African Americans. In Dobard, we have a white man who is mistakenly referred to as a Negro. And he goes to court and he actually sues for damages. And in order for you to be compensated damages for slander, what you have to prove up is that the words somehow lowered your reputation in the community. Well, this court took the view that using the reference Negro when this person was in fact white was slander. And he was compensated damages. Now, what is the implication of this? This suggests there is a stigma attached to being black. All of this predating the passage of the 13th Amendment. And then we have the plantation owners trying to understand how it is that they could treat the enslaved so well and then they would still want to escape. So they started speaking to doctors and asking, if I clothe them, I feed them, I house them, why are they so unhappy? And then emerges the medical science. A doctor named Samuel Cartwright, who was a doctor down in Louisiana and Mississippi, responds and tells these plantations owners that I've studied the condition. It is called mental illness. He gives it a name called drapetomania. So now what we have is the medical science saying that I am crazy if I do not like the idea of being oppressed. And then we get eugenics. The medical science reinforcing the notion that African Americans are of an inferior gene pool. All of this before we get the passage of the 13th Amendment. And then we arrive on that December 1865 day where this amendment is now ratified.
It has two parts, and I will read directly what it says. Section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. And then section 2 says Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So what is typical after a new law is adopted is that there is litigation. Because people say, I read the words, I don't know what that means. And so the courts are there to interpret legislation. So all these years removed now, we have had the 13th Amendment interpreted quite a few times. And the jurisprudence teaches us a few things that you should know about the 13th Amendment. The first thing it teaches us is that the goal when the 13th Amendment was adopted was to remove the incapacity of slavery. That was the first goal. The aim was something far broader than just releasing bodies off of plantation. That was not the aim. The aim was to give the enslaved people autonomy, to let them experience freedom in life. And then the third aim, according to the courts, it was never the intention of Congress to end slavery in its totality. That was never the aim. The aim was simply to end the practice of a private individual owning a private individual. The 13th Amendment sanctioned slavery by the state. How do I know? Because the court case Ruffin versus Commonwealth literally says prisoners are slaves of the state. So now here's what is unfolding after we get this thing called the 13th Amendment in the state of Louisiana. This is days after. St. Landry and Bossier Parish, through their police boards, pass a new law. The new law says freed people are prevented from obtaining employment away from their former masters. This is after passage of the amendment. What might be the penalty? It would be arrest and a vagrancy charge. In Opelousas, they rushed days after the amendment and pass a law. No Negro or freedman can rent a house in Opelousas or reside in Opelousas unless you are in service to a white person. What does the Louisiana legislature do days after passage of the 13th Amendment? A bill is presented. The bill says those emancipated people, you have 29 days to get a means of support. If not, you are arrested and hired out to the highest bidder. Now, the federal government knew when they left here after the Civil War that the South had to be watched. And so the president asked for periodic reports as to the condition of these emancipated people. Here is an excerpt of what entered the very first report. This is a matter of weeks after the 13th Amendment. There appears to be a popular notion prevalent in the South. It is that the Negro exists for the special object of raising cotton, rice, and sugar, and that it is illegitimate for him to indulge in the pursuit of his own happiness. Although the freedman is no longer considered property of an individual master, he is, in the South, considered a slave of society. We are now 1 year post passage of the 13th Amendment, and a northern official starts to learn of these developments down south, he stands on the floor of the U.S. Congress, asks the clerk for permission to read a newspaper article in the record. She grants it. The article says, caption, "Negro sold for punishment for a crime." The ad says, public sale. The undersigned will offer for sale at the courthouse door a Negro named John Johnson, age 40 years. Said Negro was convicted of larceny and sentenced to be sold. So now, Louisiana has a sizable population of African American criminals by 1866. This is only 1 year after passage of the 13th Amendment. We have criminals, but we don't have a state prison. We don't get one until 1901. So what are we going to do with all of these people? Because certainly we would not want criminals in our midst. Well, now enters a character named Major Samuel James, who was by trade an engineer. He interrupted his life in order to fight in the Civil War. On which side? The Confederate side. So Major Samuel James is fighting to maintain the institution of slavery. What does he do in 1866? He goes to the Louisiana legislature, uses his political savvy to convince them that he has fashioned a solution to our problem of all of these criminals that need somewhere to be housed. His solution involves convict leasing. His solution involves entering lease agreements with the state of Louisiana, which he does for 25 years. So if you're wondering where's he storing all of these bodies, maybe I should say to you, they were being put on the very plantations that he fought to own and fought to maintain in the Civil War. One of those plantations you already know. It goes by the name Angola. So Samuel James is simply funneling now all of the enslaved people who have turned convict onto his plantations to be leased. What are they doing on those plantations, you may wonder? Are you surprised to learn it would be agricultural work? Are you surprised to hear it would be farming? They also worked on levees. They also built railroads. The work was hard. It was literally hard labor. It was long hours. And Samuel James had a reputation of working an inmate to death. Now, what you have to remind yourself of at this point, an African American life had just a little value when you were on the plantation because you were purchased. So somebody's investment went into your life. But under this regime, there was no worth to an African American life because there was such a steady supply of criminals that Samuel James had no value whether you lived or died. So if you're wondering what that must have felt like, you should know the story of Theophile Chevalier. He was one of the inmates who lived during the Samuel James regime. He was an African American convict who was forced, of course, to work under these hard labor conditions. In the winter, they weren't always given proper clothing, not the right coats, not the right shoes. And so Mr. Chevalier is forced to work in the cold without the proper shoes. And I want you to remember later when I talk about Henry Montgomery to make the connection between him and Mr. Chevalier. But Mr. Chevalier develops frostbite. The frostbite later turns to gangrene. He eventually needs a foot amputated, and they decide it would certainly be too much trouble to bring him to a doctor, so they just removed it with a penknife. The other foot simply rotted off. So he ends up with no feet. You may wonder, what could this man have done to deserve this? The charge was theft of $5. We should know that the federal government did care about the transition of these enslaved folks, and so they created something called the Freedmen's Bureau at the end of the Civil War. And that bureau was in place to assist the newly freed with their transition. And we're now 2 whole years after passage of the 13th Amendment, and one of the officials from the Freedmen's Bureau decides that he is duty bound to go up to Congress and tell them some of what he is witnessing down south. So his testimony in 1867 reads, "The walls of the penitentiary, which has been filled to overflowing by reason of sudden emancipation, a large number of them reduced to vagrancy and theft, but to sell them for a limited time to involuntary servitude. In some cases, the sentence of imprisonment and hard labor is mitigated to the sale of the convict's labor." His pleas were also ignored. And now something extremely damaging is happening in the year 1908. This is not our first census, but this is a census that now is starting to document a large number of African American people in custody. Try to remind yourself that the North is watching this experiment called emancipation. So they don't know what we will be when we enter society, but this is now the moment where the census informs that discussion. So now we have data saying to the world that African Americans are disproportionately criminal. And this data is used to further contribute to this false notion of black criminality. So now this is a lot. And I'm sure you're wondering, what does all of this mean? I want to give you 2 possible answers. Option A is for the people in the room who believe in osmosis. And under option A, you would have to believe by osmosis that after emancipation, immediately extreme numbers of white folks suddenly became law-abiding. And then extreme numbers of African Americans became lawbreakers. That would be option A. Option B involves the belief that what we really did was create a legal system that, 1, is built upon a symbiosis between white supremacy and capitalism. 2, infected with bias that suggests African Americans are mentally inferior, limited to a servant or labor class. They are people that require supervision, lest they become mischievous. And then finally, that the only concession that the South really made was to grant these people legal freedom. They never intended to give them social or political freedom. It is my belief that option B is the correct choice. Now I want to offer a disclaimer because I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I am saying, because I am not suggesting that every person convicted is innocent. I'm not. And I am not suggesting that we shouldn't have a justice system or penitentiaries. That is not my view. My view is simply that we have created a system that is designed with systemic shortcomings, that has produced a rush to get bodies and not justice. Now, what I wish to do with the remaining time is take a look at what is currently taking place on the altar of American justice. And I would like to begin with a look at our jury system. We know from science that has been well developed now that there is a difference in the way an African American and a white person will view the very same evidence and make a determination concerning guilt or innocence. That is not an opinion, that is an established fact at this point. So if that is true, that means that you can never achieve justice if you do not have a diversity of viewpoints on a jury. Now, I am at the watch party in 2018 when the results are coming in from the decision on whether we will change our jury system back to the unanimous system that it was when the Louisiana was purchased. And I am seeing troubling things. People with shirts on, people with cake, buttons, chants, Jim Crow just died, Jim Crow is dead. And I'm saying, no, like that is not what just happened. I don't want to diminish the significance of that historic vote, but I dare not allow you to overstate what it accomplished. Jim Crow still exists in Louisiana jury boxes. How so? By the disproportionate use of strikes, both peremptory and for cause. How so? By them simply not calling us in our proper numbers, so we don't get invited to serve on the jury. This is entrenched, and if you wonder how entrenched, you are to know in 1898, when Louis A. Martinet, the African-American lawyer that engineered the Plessy versus Ferguson legal strategy, was simultaneously penning letters to the Attorney General of the United States in 1898. And what is in those letters? A plea to the federal government to recognize the practice of Louisiana excluding African Americans from jury service. You wonder how entrenched. You should know in 1947, the NAACP, with W.E.B. Du Bois as the editor, they were one of the first groups in line when the United Nations opens its doors, and they filed something called an appeal to the world. And what do they say to the United Nations in 1947? They are complaining that Negroes are being denied the right to serve on juries in the South. This term is called the Jim Crow jury. That term was coined by Louis A. Martinet. So we know right now juries have a major impact on justice, and we know that the racial composition of juries are having a major impact on trial outcomes in Louisiana. We need to also be honest about prosecutorial misconduct in the state of Louisiana. The American Bar Association tells us a prosecutor has the responsibility of a minister of justice. They are not simply an advocate according to the ABA, and there's a reason why. A prosecutor is your most powerful player in the judicial system. A prosecutor has more power than a judge, the entire public defender staff, simply by virtue of the discretion that one individual has. And I don't mean to tell you that I am describing all Louisiana prosecutors, but I do mean to tell you that we have a representative group of prosecutors that are known to be actors when it comes to misconduct in this state. The first name that you should know is Hugo Holland, who was a prosecutor in Caddo Parish. He was not a man that left to pursue other dreams. He was asked to resign after he falsified paperwork to obtain 8 automatic weapons. It has been recorded that on his wall in that DA's office was a picture of Nathan Bedfellows, the KKK leader and the Confederate general. This man operates in the state with celebrity status. This man is called all over Louisiana to prosecute capital cases. What is less known, however, is his rate of overturned cases. What is less known is when you read those overturned cases, they are overturned because of misconduct. And you may ask what has been the consequence, and the answer is absolutely, unequivocally nothing. And then you should know in New Orleans, the district attorney, Mr. Canizero, who is fully aware that there's a way to attain a subpoena, and that requires you to go to a judge and make your case and get a signature. This is the man who puts people in jail for breaking the law, but who has done what? Broken himself. He has issued fake subpoenas, forcing people to come in to speak to him and his staff. On a few of those occasions, those subpoenas have led people into incarceration. You may ask me, Professor Bell, what has happened? What is the consequence? The answer is absolutely, unequivocally nothing. And you should also know Calcasieu Parish District Attorney John DeRosia, who sat in the Louisiana legislature as the change in non-unanimous law was being debated. And he said, and I quote, "You hear a lot about this law being a vestige of slavery. No doubt this is true, but it is what it is." On the floor of the legislature. Is his behavior known? Yes, it is. All the way up to the United States Supreme Court. It has even been brought to the attention of the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. Your question for me is, what, Professor Bell, has been the consequence? My answer is absolutely, unequivocally nothing. And we dare not attempt a conversation about prosecutorial misconduct without talking about my cherished friend, the late John Thompson, who was the plaintiff in the Thompson v. Connick case, who sat in Angola because a Louisiana prosecutor had blood results showing that the perpetrator was not John Thompson. But he tried him anyway, convicted him anyway, and he spent 18 years of his innocent life in Angola. I should mention that 14 of those years were on death row. I should also tell you that this young man left behind 2 very young children and had execution warrants signed for him routinely. The stress of fighting to free yourself from this caused John Thompson to develop a heart condition. And when he was exonerated, he didn't opt to take care of his personal health. He opted to become a criminal justice reformer. And he fought all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And then after that, he continued his fight, deciding that the best strategy would be to enter law schools. So he traveled all over the United States and every law school in Louisiana, figuring that since nobody is telling this story, I will be the speaker. And then I find myself in the year 2017 looking in a casket at John Thompson, knowing that this is not really a death, this was actually a murder. And I'm asking, what is going to be the consequence? I maybe should tell you absolutely, unequivocally nothing. We know now that 43% of wrongful convictions are attributable to official misconduct in the state. This has been studied thoroughly. We have respected scholars all over the nation describing what is taking place in Louisiana as rampant, as an epidemic. And I want to offer you next a glimpse into what my experience was inside the appellate courts. I first want you to know that I noticed that almost every judge that was deciding on cases inside those appellate courts had a certain pedigree. And the pedigree was that they usually started off as prosecutors, and then they usually ran for the trial court bench, and then they usually ran for the appellate court bench, and they all had the same pedigree. They all were white, majority, mostly men, and they are making decisions in the absence of diversity. One of the things that alarmed me the most was understanding what it took to get a criminal case reversed, and I want to be sure that you leave here knowing that those judges do not have the authority to reverse a criminal case because they feel an injustice took place. That is not the way the process works. I want you to listen carefully to the two considerations that they have to entertain. The first one is that those judges, the group I just described, they have to review the evidence in the light most favorable to the prosecution. And then they have to ask the question if it is reasonable that a jury, having heard those facts, knowing the law controlling, would make that decision. And if they find so, they must deny. That is by the strength of the Constitution, so they don't have the choices to reverse. So it is not a new trial like you may think. It feels almost like the inside of a production environment, like a conveyor belt is running, and like deny happens all day, every day at a steady pace. Next, we need to look at how Louisiana funds its court system. Louisiana uses a very unique method of funding its system. It is not in sync with the rest of the world. We use something called a non-unified system. And what that means is that the state does not entirely fund its judicial branch. Other states do, and they call that a uniform court system. So now what happens if you have members of the judicial branch not being funded by the state? They get a hustle. And so you listen to some of the hustles. First one, Calcasieu Parish, you have charges on you. If you would like your charges dismissed, buy gift cards and donate them to the district attorney's office.
Wow.
The second one is cash bail, right? When you are in a position where you have bail to post, you have not been convicted of anything. You have simply been accused. So what bail is a chance to say, I would like to walk out of here, I'll pay for my freedom. It's almost like extortion. And then the money that you use is funneling to members of the judicial system. We, by the way, are one of only 2 countries on the globe that uses a cash bail system. And then you've probably heard about these pretrial diversion programs where we'll keep the charges off your record, you just pay us a fee. And then the fee happens to be an excessive fee. Now, 2018, we got a very defining moment in this conversation. Our Chief Justice, Bernadette Johnson, spoke before the Louisiana legislature to give her state of the judiciary address. And there's a few things that you have to hear from her. This is her words. She says to the Louisiana legislature, there is no central oversight of the assessment or collection of court costs at this moment in Louisiana. This is the Chief Justice. She continues, there is also no accounting. Please listen carefully to this next statement. The Chief Justice says, currently, innocence is bad for our bottom line in the state of Louisiana. That is a direct quote. The Louisiana Commission on Justice System Funding just 2 days ago issued a report, and here is what they have found after studying what I have shared. Louisiana's reliance on fines, fees to fund its judicial system is ineffective, unfair, and possibly unconstitutional. So what we have done is built a system with perverse incentives to add fines, fees, and cost, but more importantly, to oppose any attempt to make meaningful criminal justice reform. So now why should you care? Because you are non-lawyers, a lot of you. One of the reasons is because of the design of Louisiana's legal system. We are not like any other state because the other states have something called a common law system. And under a common law system, judges are very, very powerful. They actually make the law. Civil law is not designed as such. So in our jurisdictions, judges should not have the power that they have been exercising. The design here is, if you open the code, it tells you in Louisiana, law is the will of the people. So the design in a state like this is that citizens, academics, stakeholders, victims, you are currently involved in legislative making in the state of Louisiana, and that has not happened. The experiment was done with the non-unanimous jury vote, and you all saw how well that worked. But that was an exercise of us being civilians, and we need more of that. Another reason for you to consider being involved is that there is a justice gap. And I know you've heard about all these lawyers, but the truth is that we have more legal needs than legal services. We have outpaced ourselves because of the volume. So the depth of the problem and the breadth of the problem is so enormous that it now requires the involvement of non-lawyer advocates also. And then lastly, for those people who say, I don't commit crimes, I don't have anything to do with the justice system, I'm not fighting for people who did that crime and don't want to do the time, it's important that you realize who is in fact incarcerated. And another reason for you to be involved is because they simply have no voice. You become the voice of a person who's on the inside. So who's in there? You should first know that there are actually innocent people sitting behind bars in the state of Louisiana. And when I say innocent, I mean simply awaiting trial. They've been accused of something. They've never been tried and convicted of anything. They're there, which means it could be any of us. You also have innocent people in the sense that they actually have been brought to trial and they have been convicted, but they are wrongfully convicted, such as the late John Thompson. And then you have poor people who are simply there because they couldn't meet the demands of the extortionists. You also have asylum seekers now, people who were afraid for their lives and they sought refuge in the United States, and we have also criminalized those people. And then we also now have a class of victims behind bars, and I'm speaking about the group of people from 1898 to the year 2018 that were rushed through juries that were not unanimous. I'm speaking of people whose juries made mistakes because they weren't careful, whose juries made mistakes because the law allowed them to ignore the one or two people who raised reasonable doubt. And I'm speaking about the people who just were incentivized to take plea bargains because of the fear that they had for going before non-unanimous juries. They are all there. We house the mentally ill in jail. We house people who are simply over-sentenced, like the lifers in the state of Louisiana right now, the juvenile lifers, who now have been told Louisiana by two courts, the Miller Court and the Montgomery Court, that you simply cannot give a person a mandatory life sentence for a crime they have done as a juvenile. But we still have many of those people in custody because Louisiana is doing what it did after the Civil War. We should know when we talk about this population, there is a man named Henry Montgomery that I referenced earlier, who walked into Angola at the age of 17. He is still in Angola at the age of 74. He is one of the Montgomery individuals, and he is the individual who brought the Montgomery case to the United States Supreme Court and prevailed. That is a precedent not for Louisiana, but for the United States. which means that other juvenile lifers have benefited from his litigation while he remains in Angola. So in December, I asked, how is Mr. Montgomery doing? And the response that I got in December was that he is indoors quite a bit because rain is collecting on the tier. And he has shoes that are so worn that his toes are coming out. And so to avoid getting his toes wet, he remains on the weekends inside that dorm. And so then I said, well, how much are the boots and how much does he have and does he have family? The answer is he has no family left. This is one of our criminal justice reformers. The boots were $102, and you should know that Mr. Montgomery earns 2 cents per hour. This is our criminal justice reformer. We also have people in solitary confinement. And you should know that that does not mean that a person has done anything wrong behind bars. You can be put in solitary confinement because a warden decides that that's where he would wish you to be. And if that happens, you don't have any choices. You could be there indefinitely. And we should also know that these people behind bars, they don't receive everything paid for like some of you may think. Some of them still have to pay co-pays when they see the doctor. Some of them still have to furnish toiletries for themselves, clothing for themselves. And lastly, we should know that there is nothing pleasurable about being inside of a prison. Nothing. It is always too hot or always too cold. There is a shortage of programming inside these facilities. It is a place of profound suffering and trauma and despair. And you are needed to speak for all of these people who are voiceless. So I'm asking you a few things. I want you to recognize now that it is true that law and injustice have become bedfellows. I want you to understand that our priority for this hour has to be policy. So what is policy? Policy would be the beliefs and the attitudes that shape legislation. So if the lawmakers are operating from a biased place, the laws will be biased. And so our role now is to be a part of any policy discussions. We are also to know that there's something called a movement to have racial impact bills presented whenever legislation is on the table, so that we study before a law is made how it is going to impact communities of color. And we are to know that we should not entertain prosecutors who come to pimp our churches at election hour. We should be voting for prosecutors who are progressive, who are not giving jobs to any of these prosecutors who are committing official misconduct on the job. That should be our priority, and this is a very time-sensitive call. I'm asking you to move today with all deliberate speed. And you may be asking me why. Why is this time sensitive? I just want to take you back to 1963. And I want you to hear what Dr. Martin Luther King said as he sat where? Not only in the Birmingham jail, but in solitary confinement. As he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail, because he was being attacked by clergy members, and he said, I'm going to respond to these clergy members, and I'm going to tell them, they want to know why am I causing all this trouble. They called him an agitator. Why am I having all these marches? Why am I doing these sit-ins? And Dr. King said, listen to me. I didn't start this first. I didn't try to go march first. What I did first, I tried to talk. I actually tried to pray. We tried waiting. We tried negotiating. We tried litigating, says Dr. King. But then he says it just comes a time when the cup of endurance just runs over. And men are no longer willing to be plunged in the abyss of despair. and we are at that time. I want you to juxtapose the day we emancipated the enslaved. We released 4 billion people, 4 million. I want you to realize today we are holding 2.2 million people in custody. We are holding another 4.4 million people under some form of penal supervision. So we're contrasting 4 million, we're contrasting that to over 6 million. So when it comes to mass incarceration, we have actually been walking on a treadmill since 1865. When we look at the Freedmen Bureau records, the day after the first week of us releasing the emancipated population, you would think the mothers would be asking for clothing. You would think these newly freed mothers would be asking for housing. But what these newly freed mothers pled first was for their babies. And they were frantically describing to those officials how a child might look that they gave birth to. They remembered the father. They remembered that maybe he was sold to a plantation, and they were pleading desperately, please go find my babies. They didn't want to start their new lives without their babies because those babies were in someone else's custody. I want you just to process what our mothers doing today. We are pleading for our babies that's in somebody else's custody. So when we talk about achieving justice and equality, ending structural racism and discrimination, eliminating bias and Jim Crow tactics, we're on quicksand. And for those who have been plunged into the abyss of despair by what I have said, I'm going to end with a quote that I often share with my students. And I ask my students on days like today, what would be the worst day in the life of a slave? And they usually raise their hands and they'll say, Professor Bell, it had to be the day that slave was severely beaten. That would be the worst day. And then some of them would say, no, that couldn't be it. It would probably be the day that slave watched family be separated. And then I'd correct them and I said, no, what it really was, it's the day that the slave accepts that he is a slave. Because it is at that point, you no longer need a slave master.
That's right.
You will never try to read again once you have accepted the institution of slavery because you don't feel the need for knowledge. You will never try to escape because there is no yearning for freedom. You see, the slave's body becomes his physical plantation. It holds his mind and his heart and his soul. I want to remind you that vigilance is the enemy of acceptance. I have sounded the war horn. You have now been called to action. I want you to leave here and make this a season of intent and not a season of habit. Thank you so much.
Attorney Professor Angela Allen Bell, please, once again. I want you to also remember that this conversation continues in Baker, Louisiana on Friday of this week, disrupting the injustice narrative, the inaugural Underground Railroad to Justice Summit. I also want to recognize some very special brothers in the audience, members of the Angola 3 who are amongst us.
We have Albert Woodfox and Robert King. I also want to make sure that everybody realizes, in addition to these two who remain standing, we have some of the original members of the Louisiana Black Panther Party. If you will rise, Betty, Ron, Malik, come on, get up. And I want you all to know that many of these people were in a building in Louisiana and had bullets released at them, and they were charged with murder. And they sat in Orleans Parish Prison on death row, and they were exonerated ultimately. But these are your servants in this community who have sacrificed quite a bit. And then after them, Norris Henderson, if you will rise, from the VOTE organization, who has fought advocacy in the state to change conditions for the incarcerated and poor populations. And then Calvin Duncan all the way in the back, also our keynote speaker for Friday and an advocate for justice in the state of Louisiana, Pernell Hebert, a playwright who advocates for justice through his plays. And my professor back here, Professor Lestage, if you will rise, she was one of my great legendary professors at the Law Center, and Ms. Rainey in the front, who is the director and facilitator for the Civil Rights Institute.
Power to the people. I'd like to, before we get on with the program, and I call Sister Angela back to the podium, I'd like to make a statement to the young people, in particular the young ladies. And I'm sure Attorney Bell will support this statement. What was discussed today was about advocacy. Advocating on behalf of those persons who are wrongfully incarcerated, or for those persons who were incarcerated for having done something, but who are being treated illegally behind bars. But this was also a call, an alarm being sounded on your behalf. The fastest growing population of prisoners in the United States, I read once, recently, young black women. And so it is important that this message really reach you. You have to understand that we're not in a country that cherishes us, which is why the Black Lives Matter movement is so important. You must recognize how cherished you are. But it has to start from within. And so as we advocate for those persons who are incarcerated, we are also advocating for those who may become incarcerated in the very near future. So it's important not to leave here saying, oh, I don't know what this is like. It's important that you listen. And if you can, attend the program on Friday where the conversation will continue in Baker, Louisiana. I also want to identify the fact that what is happening here with this affair and Friday's affair is exemplary of the fact that the Southern system is coalescing. The Center for African American Studies here at SUNO and the very important center at Southern University that Professor Bell manages. She is the director of the Louis A. Berry Institute of Civil Rights and Justice at Southern University. We are coalescing and producing this affair and the very important summit which will take place on Friday. I'd like to bring Sister Angela to the podium once again. I'd like to present you with this plaque of appreciation. It reads, Southern University at New Orleans Center for African and African American Studies, a Title III program. It's a certificate of appreciation for being the 2020 Charles Frye Memorial Lecture. It's presented to you, Professor at Southern University at New Orleans, at Baton Rouge, and the Law Center, the Director of the Louis Berry Institute for Civil Rights and Justice, and an esteemed chair. You hold an esteemed chair in that law center. Again, we present this to you and it is signed by the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Evelyn Harrell, the Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives, Executive Director for Title III Programs, Dr. Brenda Jackson, and myself, Dr. Clyde Robertson, Director for the Center for African and African American Studies. Thank you, sister. Thought you wanted Brother Penny out the shop.
Yeah, actually, I do. All right, here we go. One more. All right. Got it?
Okay, we end the program with two beautiful selections by the choir from St. Catherine's Drexel High School.
Everybody say bless, 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 bless. If you're going to say I'm blessed, bless, you're blessed, bless, we're blessed, we're blessed, we're blessed, we're blessed, we're blessed in the
much.
the St. Catherine's Choir. They performed especially for their great alum, Professor Angela Bell. Again, I'd like to thank you for coming out, and I'd like to thank Professor Bell for giving us that eye-opening, soul-stirring presentation. The AKOBEN was founded. I'd like to thank all the podium guests, of course the administrators at SUNO, and all of you for coming out. As a token of our appreciation, we have a karamu in the back, a feast. I would like for the people who are seated here in this central space to remain seated. I'd like to acknowledge some young brothers who have been working with us thus far this morning and in all of our programs, the brothers from the Honoré Center. The brothers from the Honoré Center are actually serving the elders who are seated in this realm. We'd like the young ladies from St. Mary's and St. Catherine's to approach the tables for lunch, followed by the students from 35 and our beloveds from SUNO who are on the side. So, brothers, if you could start serving the center. Again, thank you for coming out, and let's remain and mingle. And if Professor Bell does not have any problems or issues with this, you can continue the conversation with Professor Bell at her table. Thank you again. And please join me in recognizing Professor Bell.